Czech, formerly known as Bohemian, is a West Slavic language strongly influenced by Latin and German. It is spoken by over 10 million people and is the official language of the Czech Republic. Czech's closest relative is Slovak, with which it is mutually intelligible. It is closely related to other West Slavic languages, such as Silesian and Polish. Although most Czech vocabulary is based on shared roots with Slavic, Romance, and Germanic languages, many loanwords have been adopted in recent years. The language began in its present linguistic branch as Old Czech before slowly dwindling in importance, dominated by German in the Czech lands. During the mid-18th century, it experienced a revival in which Czech academics stressed the past accomplishments of the people and advocated the return of Czech as a major language. It has changed little since that time, except for minor morphological shifts and the formalization of colloquial elements. Its phoneme inventory is moderate in size, comprising 5 vowels and 25 consonants. Words may contain uncommon consonant clusters, including one consonant represented by the graphy mark, or lack vowels altogether. Czech orthography is simple, and has been used as a model by phonologists. As a member of the Slavic subfamily of the Indo-European languages, Czech is a highly inflected fusional language. Its nouns and adjectives undergo a complex system of declension for case, number, gender, animacy, and type of ending consonant. Verbs are conjugated somewhat more simply for tense, number, and gender. Because of this inflection, Czech word order is very flexible and words may be transposed to change emphasis or form questions. Classification. Czech is classified as a member of the West Slavic sub-branch of the Slavic branch of the Indo-European language family. This branch includes Polish, Kashubian, Upper and Lower Sorbian, and Slovak. Slovak is by far the closest genetic neighbor of Czech, and the languages are closer than any other pair of West Slavic languages. The West Slavic languages are spoken in an area classified as part of Central Europe. Except for Polish, they differ from East and South Slavic languages by their initial syllable stress, and Czech is distinguished from other West Slavic languages by a more restricted distinction between hard and soft consonants. Mutual intelligibility. Czech and Slovak have been considered mutually intelligible. Speakers of either language can communicate with greater ease than those of any other pair of West Slavic languages. Since the 1993 dissolution of Czechoslovakia, mutual intelligibility has declined for younger speakers, probably because Czech speakers now experience less exposure to Slovak and vice versa. The languages have not undergone the deliberate highlighting of minor linguistic differences in the name of nationalism as has occurred in the Bosnian, Serbian and Croatian standards of Serbo-Croatian. However, most Slavic languages have been distanced in this way from Russian influences because of widespread public resentment against the former Soviet Union. Czech and Slovak form a dialect continuum, with great similarity between neighboring Czech and Slovak dialects. In phonetic differences, Czech is characterized by glottal stop before initial vowels and Slovak by its less frequent use of long vowels than Czech. However, Slovak has long forms of the consonants R and L when they function as vowels. Phonemic differences between the two languages are generally consistent, typical of two dialects of a language. Grammatically, although Czech has a vocative case, both languages share a common syntax. One study showed that Czech and Slovak lexicons differed by 80%, but this high percentage was found to stem primarily from differing orthographies and slight inconsistencies in morphological formation. Slovak morphology is more regular. The two lexicons are generally considered similar, with most differences found in colloquial vocabulary and some scientific terminology. Slovak has slightly more borrowed words than Czech. The similarities between Czech and Slovak led to the languages being considered a single language by a group of 19th-century scholars who call themselves Czechoslavs, believing that the peoples were connected in a way which excluded German Bohemians and Hungarians and other Slavicists during the First Czechoslovak Republic. Although Czechoslovak was designated as the Republic's official language, both Czech and Slovak written standards were used. Standard written Slovak was partially modeled on literary Czech, and Czech was preferred for some official functions in the Slovak half of the Republic. Czech influence on Slovak was protested by Slovak scholars, and when Slovakia broke off from Czechoslovakia in 1938 as the Slovak state, literary Slovak was deliberately distanced from Czech. When the Axis powers lost the war and Czechoslovakia reformed, Slovak developed somewhat on its own. During the Prague Spring of 1968, Slovak gained independence from Czech. Since then, Czechoslovak refers to improvised pidgins of the languages which have arisen from the decrease in mutual intelligibility. History. Origins. Proto-Czech and Old Czech. Around the 6th century AD, a tribe of Slavs arrived in a portion of Central Europe. According to legend, they were led by a hero named Czech, from whom the word Czech derives. The 9th century brought the state of Great Moravia, whose first ruler invited Byzantine ruler Michael III to send missionaries in an attempt to reduce the influence of East Francia on religious and political life in his country. These missionaries, Constantine and Methodius, helped to convert the Czechs from traditional Slavic paganism to Christianity and established a church system. They also brought the Glagolitic alphabet to the West Slavs, whose language was previously unwritten. This language, later known as Proto-Czech, was beginning to separate from its fellow West Slavic hatchlings Proto-Slovak, Proto-Polish and Proto-Sorbian. Among other features, Proto-Czech was marked by its ephemeral use of the voiced velar fricative consonant and consistent stress on the first syllable. The Czech's language separated from other Slavic tongues into what would later be called Old Czech by the 13th century, a classification extending through the 16th century. Its use of cases differed from the modern language, although Old Czech did not yet have a vocative case or an anima c distinction. Declension for its 6 cases and 3 genders rapidly became complicated, and its declension patterns resembled those of Lithuanian. While Old Czech had a basic alphabet from which a general set of orthographical correspondences was drawn, it did not have a standard orthography. It also contained a number of sound clusters which no longer exist, allowing E after soft consonants, which has since shifted to E, and allowing complex consonant clusters to be pronounced all at once rather than syllabically. A phonological phenomenon, Havlic's law, appeared in Old Czech, counting backwards from the end of a clause. Every odd-numbered year was vocalized as a vowel, while the other years disappeared. Bohemia increased in power over the centuries, as its language did in regional importance. This growth was expedited during the 14th century by Holy Roman Emperor Charles IV, who founded Charles University in Prague in 1348. Here, early Czech literature flourished. Old Czech texts, including poetry and cookbooks, were produced outside the university as well. Later in the century, Jan Hus contributed significantly to the standardization of Czech orthography, advocated for widespread literacy among Czech commoners, and made early efforts to model written Czech after the spoken language. Czech continued to evolve and gain in regional importance for hundreds of years, and has been a literary language in the Slovak lands since the early 15th century. A biblical translation, the Kralis Bible, was published during the late 16th century, which was more linguistically conservative than either. The publication of the Kralis Bible spawned widespread nationalism, and in 1615 the government of Bohemia ruled that only Czech-speaking residents would be allowed to become full citizens or inherit goods or land. This, and the conversion of the Czech upper classes from the Habsburg Empire's Catholicism to Protestantism, angered the Habsburgs and helped trigger the 30 Years' War. The Czechs became serfs. Bohemia's printing industry were dismembered, removing official regulation and support from its language. German quickly became the dominant language in Bohemia. Revival. Modern Czech. The consensus among linguists is that modern Standard Czech originated during the 18th century. By then the language had developed a literary tradition, and since then it has changed little. Journals from that period have no substantial differences from modern Standard Czech, and contemporary Czechs can understand them with little difficulty. Changes include the morphological shift of I to EJ and EQ to I, and the merging of I and the former AG. Sometime before the 18th century, the Czech language abandoned a distinction between phonemic L and, which survives in Slovak. The Czech people gained widespread national pride during the mid-18th century, inspired by the Age of Enlightenment a half-century earlier. Czech historians began to emphasize the people's accomplishments from the 15th through the 17th centuries, rebelling against the Counter-Reformation. Czech philologists studied 16th-century texts, advocating the return of the language to high culture. This period is known as the Czech National Revival. During the revival, in 1809, linguist and historian Josef Dabrowski released a German-language grammar of Old Czech entitled Ausführliches Lehrbuch der Bohemischen Sprache. Dabrowski had intended his book to be descriptive, and did not think Czech had a realistic chance of returning as a major language. However, Joseph Jungmann and other revivalists used Dabrowski's book to advocate for a Czech linguistic revival. Changes during this time included spelling reform, the use of T to end infinitive verbs, and the non-capitalization of nouns. These changes differentiated Czech from Slovak. Modern scholars disagree about whether the conservative revivalists were motivated by nationalism or considered contemporary spoken Czech unsuitable for formal, widespread use. Adherence to historical patterns was later relaxed, and Standard Czech adopted a number of features from Common Czech, such as leaving some proper nouns undeclined. This has resulted in a relatively high level of homogeneity among all varieties of the language. Geographic distribution. In 2005 and 2007, Czech was spoken by about 10 million residents of the Czech Republic. A Eurobarometer survey conducted from January to March 2012 found that the first language of 98% of Czech citizens was Czech, the third highest in the European Union. Czech, the official language of the Czech Republic, is one of the EU's official languages, and the 2012 Eurobarometer survey found that Czech was the foreign language most often used in Slovakia. Economist Jonathan Van Paris collected data on language knowledge in Europe for the 2012 European Day of Languages. The 5 countries with the greatest use of Czech were the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Portugal, Poland and Germany. Czech speakers in Slovakia primarily live in cities, since it is a recognized minority language in Slovakia. Slovak citizens who speak only Czech may communicate with the government in the language to the extent that Slovak speakers in the Czech Republic made so. United States immigration of Czechs from Europe to the United States occurred primarily from 1848 to 1914. Czech is a less commonly taught language in U.S. schools, and is taught at Czech heritage centers. Large communities of Czech Americans live in the states of Texas, Nebraska and Wisconsin. In the 2000 United States Census, Czech was reported as the most common language spoken at home in Valley, Butler and Saunders counties, Nebraska and Republic County, Kansas. With the exception of Spanish, Czech was the most common home language in over a dozen additional counties in Nebraska, Kansas, Texas, North Dakota and Minnesota. As of 2009, 70,500 Americans spoke Czech as the first language. Dialects. In addition to a spoken standard and a closely related written standard, Czech has several regional dialects primarily used in rural areas by speakers less proficient in other dialects of Standard Czech. During the second half of the 20th century, Czech dialect use began to weaken. By the early 1990s, dialect use was stigmatized, associated with the shrinking lower class and used in literature or other media for comedic effect. Increased travel and media availability to dialect-speaking populations has encouraged them to shift to Standard Czech, although Czech has received considerable scholarly interest for a Slavic language. This interest has focused primarily on modern Standard Czech and ancient texts rather than dialects. Standard Czech is still the norm for politicians, businesspeople and other Czechs in formal situations, but Common Czech is gaining ground in journalism and the mass media. A detailed 2003 estimate from the Czech Statistical Office counts the following dialects: Naresi Středočeska, Naresi Jihozápadočeska, Podskupina Chodska, Podskupina Doudlebska, Naresi Českomoravska, Naresi Středomoravska, Podskupina Tisnovska, Naresi Východomoravska, Podskupina Slovaka, Podskupina Valašska, Naresi Slezska, Naresi Severovýchodočeska, Podskupina Podnoska. The main colloquial Czech dialect, spoken primarily near Prague but also throughout the country, is known as Common Czech. This is an academic distinction. Most Czechs are unaware of the term or associated with vernacular Czech. Compared to Standard Czech, Common Czech is characterized by simpler inflection patterns and differences in sound distribution. The Czech dialects spoken in Moravia and Silesia are known as Moravian. In the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Bohemian Moravian Slovak was a language citizens could register as speaking. Of the Czech dialects, only Moravian is distinguished in nationwide surveys by the Czech Statistical Office. As of 2011, 62,908 Czech citizens spoke Moravian as the first language and 45,561 were diglossal. Beginning in the 16th century, some varieties of Czech resembled Slovak. The southeastern Moravian dialects, in particular, are sometimes considered dialects of Slovak rather than Czech. These dialects form a continuum between the Czech and Slovak languages, using the same declension patterns for nouns and pronouns and the same verb conjugations as Slovak. In a 1964 textbook on Czech dialectology, Bratislav Koudela used the following sentence to highlight phonetic differences between dialects. Phonology. Czech contains 10 basic vowel phonemes, and 3 more found only in loanwords. They are a, o, and u, the long counterparts, a, I, o, and u, and 3 diphthongs, our, o, and u. The latter 2 diphthongs and the long o are exclusive to loanwords. Vowels are never reduced to schwa sounds when unstressed. Each word usually has primary stress on its first syllable, except for enclitics. In all words of more than 2 syllables, every odd-numbered syllable receives secondary stress. Stress is unrelated to vowel length, and the possibility of stressed short vowels and unstressed long vowels can be confusing to students whose native language combines the features. voiced consonants with unvoiced counterparts are unvoiced at the end of a word, or when they are followed by unvoiced consonants. Czech consonants are categorized as hard, neutral or soft. Hard D per hour KN RTX, neutral B FL per meter P per second VZ, soft CJJN RTST. This distinction describes the declension patterns of nouns, which is based on the category of a noun's ending consonant. Hard consonants may not be followed by I or I in writing, or soft ones by Y. Neutral consonants may take either character. Hard consonants are sometimes known as strong, and soft ones as weak. The phoneme represented by the letter R is considered unique to Czech. It represents the raised alveolar non-sonant trill, a sound somewhere between Czech's R and Z, and is present in Dvoř. The consonants R and L can be syllabic, acting as syllable nuclei in place of a vowel. This can be difficult for non-native speakers to pronounce, and strcprstskrzk is a Czech tongue twister. Vocabulary. Czech vocabulary derives primarily from Slavic, Baltic and other Indo-European roots. Although most verbs have Balto-Slavic origins, pronouns, prepositions and some verbs have wider Indo-European roots. Some loanwords have been restructured by folk etymology to resemble native Czech words. Most Czech loanwords originated in one of two time periods. Earlier loanwords, primarily from German, Greek and Latin, arrived before the Czech national revival. More recent loanwords derive primarily from English and French, and also from Hebrews, Arabic and Persian. Many Russian loanwords, principally animal names and naval terms, also exist in Czech. Although older German loanwords were colloquial, recent borrowings from other languages are associated with high culture. During the 19th century, words with Greek and Latin roots were rejected in favor of those based on older Czech words and common Slavic roots. Music is muzika in Polish, and in Russian, but in Czech it is hudba. Some Czech words have been borrowed as loanwords into English and other languages, for example, robot and polka.